All right, we should be live. Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the paper session on clinical practice. I'll be your session chair, Tim Yu. Today we have 4 speakers. The first one is Ewelina Kotowska, who's going to be presenting a paper on expansion of consciousness and reinterpretation of healing in psychotherapy. Please unmute yourself and we can get underway.
Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. How are you? Should I start?
Yes, you can. Do you have any slides to share?
I do, yeah. Am I able to share my screen? Because it says host disabled.
You should now be able to share your screen. Awesome. And also, while you're getting set up, let me just maybe put in some idea of how the session is going to go. So each of the speaker will have 10 minutes each. Which is 40 minutes in total because there are 4 speakers. And then at the end, if we have questions, we'll do Q&A, so question and answer period. And if there are any other questions, you can reach the speakers through networking. So with that out of the way, let's get on with the first paper session.
Okay, hey everyone. So I'm Ewelina Kotowska, I go by Ev, and I know that we only have 10 minutes, so I will be going through these slides very quickly. So my topic is consciousness, neuroscience, and spirituality, the reinterpretation of healing and psychotherapy. And essentially the crux of my work and of this paper is to understand that it's really important to infuse spirituality back into the field of psychotherapy and really emphasize that field. And in so doing, also looking at interdisciplinary work. So looking at fields such as neuroscience, philosophy, and spirituality as a way to deepen the context and broaden the lens on how we understand healing. So why did I essentially find this important? So we have a problem statement, which is that when there was a surge of evidence-based treatments in psychotherapy, it posed a threat to traditional psychotherapy. So for example, EBTs are considered to be a one-size-fits-all model. These are some of the critiques, that it constricts and constrains the human experience. That essentially when we abandon materialism, we abandon science, right? And so looking at everything really from just a very narrow perspective, whereas if we bring spiritual experiences or spirituality back into the forefront of psychology, we're able to see that we are a very expansive entity, right? Whether it's through our mind and body, but again, shifting the paradigm to include spirituality as well. So throughout history, when we look at the field of psychology and even philosophy, we've always had these problems, and almost schools of thoughts have been vying for dominance, right? Between science and spirituality, objectivity versus subjectivity, introspection versus behavior. And in this case, what my point is rational mind versus non-rational mind. So the rational mind really means knowledge being obtained through logic and reason, and the non-rational mind being knowledge obtained through intuition and inner wisdom. So again, what I said earlier, these are common threads in scientific debates, that the field of psychology disregards and undervalues noetic and spiritual experiences, that spiritually integrated psychotherapies are underfunded, and that essentially science in the tangible world will always be at the forefront, will always be the most important. So let me just keep going. So I'm not going to get really too into what is the mind, but essentially, the human brain has over 100 billion neurons. And so we know that, as human beings, this is a quote that I really like, we can identify galaxies light years away, study particles smaller than the atom, but we still haven't unlocked the mystery of the 3 pounds of matter that sits between our ears. So what's the purpose of me including this quote? Well, for example, if we look at the field of neuroscience and specifically the study of consciousness, we to this day still have yet to define what consciousness is. In fact, we really haven't defined it. And David Chambers coined it the heart problem, right? So how do physical processes, AKA your brain, give rise to qualia or subjective experience? And so if we still have not grasped who we are at the most fundamental level, then who are we to deem what is important versus what is not when it pertains to the human experience, i.e. spirituality or spiritual experiences? So I'm going to skip a little bit. So what does that have to do with healing, right? When we look at this conference, the question really is how do we transcend suffering? So again, my point is we have to be able to shift and broaden the paradigm, right? So bringing spiritual experiences back in. And so how do we transcend the mind, or how do we understand what spirituality really is? Well, for one, we understand that it is a way to seek the sacred, or it is a way to be able to know the inner ways of the self. It is a way to connect to something greater than oneself. And so, throughout different fields and again, different schools of thought, we have different terminology. So we have flow, we have oneness, also known as non-dual experience. And that pretty much means that you are able to connect with something greater than yourself. And when we look at neurotheology, which is a field that studies spirituality and neuroscience, we see that people who have spiritual experiences or experience things like non-dual awareness, they say that they feel like they're timeless. They say that they feel like there's no such thing as time and space, that they feel like they're going from being more exclusive to inclusive. And so the healing lies within these experiences when we are able to not only connect to the deepest part of ourselves, but when we are able to feel interconnected and connected to the greater world around you. And this essentially is what self-transcendence also connotes. So again, interconnectedness, deeper connection to self yields a deeper connection with others. And the more that one delves introspectively, the greater one's understanding is of the self and the more greater world, which is really at the forefront of also how we understand psychological healing. And again, here, healing and oneness, there are different ways of understanding this, knowing that the personal experience of the transcendence of suffering, again, when you're able to look at this from a psychological perspective, we also understand that healing doesn't always happen in isolation, that healing happens through the co-regulation of having someone with you. So, for example, a therapist, that when you're able to be with someone who can help you co-regulate, that harmony in and of itself is very healing. And this, of course, is what subsumes the definitions of empathy, right? Being able to connect to the other in such a way that you're actually able to feel the other's pain, which science also is able to show us, specifically scientific experiments. And similarly, empathy can also lead to oneness, which goes back to my point on interconnectedness. And lastly, I just want to point out that just because a well-known psychologist or brilliant scientist or even Nobel laureate advances an assertion with utmost confidence does not mean that we should accept it uncritically. Our critical thinking skills in certain domains may be superior to theirs. So just because that we see spirituality as being undervalued or not being at the forefront of scientific experiments does not mean that this is something that we should neglect from scientific experiments and learning. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was a really quick presentation on your part. You still have 3 minutes, so perhaps you could tell us a bit about how you got into this sort of research, or what led you to this current research direction.
Yeah, I think being in grad school, seeing that there was such a rise of evidence-based treatments, and of course I'm completely supportive of that, but I noticed that in the process of really aligning with models such as, let's say, CBT, we were avoiding and neglecting other traditional psychotherapies or elements of traditional psychotherapies, such as spiritual experiences or noetic experiences, which is really looking at human beings and their inner wisdom and understanding how we seek to obtain knowledge through our inner knowing and through understanding the sacred. And that really bothered me because in order to understand the whole human experience, we have to look beyond cerebral activity, right? We can't just look at the brain. We have to look at the whole thing. And again, if we to this day in 2021 can't really define consciousness, then who are we to say that spiritual experiences don't exist or that they don't matter? If, in fact, spiritual experiences are very much so a part of consciousness, a part of conscious experience. So I think that's what really led me to do this work, is to be able to kind of swing the pendulum back and bring that information back into psychotherapy and the field of psychology as a whole.
Well, that's really great. Thanks for sharing. And there's this other term I'm really interested in after you mentioned it's called neurotheology, right? So I'll certainly look more into that myself. All right, so let's move on to our second paper session for this session. It's going to be from Shaima, and she's going to talk about transpersonal meanings of hope and suffering, implications for cultural sensitivity in trauma therapy. I see I already shared your screen. Very good. All right. So with that, yep, you can start whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the settings on how to change the slides. Okay.
Right. So you could start the slideshow.
Yeah. Yes. I think it's on slideshow now.
Yep. Play from start. There we go. All right.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody. And after that wonderful presentation by the previous speaker, it is something connected to what that speaker already talked about. And my paper is titled Transpersonal Dimensions of Hope and Suffering and Implications for Cultural Sensitivity in Trauma Therapy. And so we all know that hope and expectancy is foundational to healing and therapy. There's no doubt about that, which is why we keep referring to hope as a key common factor in therapy. And over the years, from the early 1990s to date, there are several different conceptual models of hope that is put forward to explain the mechanism of hope in healing and therapy. And just to take two examples, maybe the most popular one is the agency and pathway models by Snyder. And then in the most recent research, we have something called being hope, the contrast between being hope and doing hope, action-based hope, and the spiritual hope, just what is infused into a person. So there is no doing part to it, but I just feel hopeful, and there is an experience of being hopeful rather than the doing part, which is implied in agency and pathway models of hope. Another thing that we see from review of literature would be that hope is emerging as an important mediator, positive predictor of post-traumatic growth among survivors of trauma. And more, we have the understanding that hope and experience of hope is an important factor in that restores one sense of resilience and one sense of wellness in context of trauma and deep suffering. Now, that is where the relevance of this paper comes in, because in moments of deep suffering, what is evoked is also a person's access or openness into transpersonal realms of being or existence, which is what we call by spiritual emergence or spiritual experience, different variations of spiritual experiences that arise in moments of deep suffering and pain. And in those moments, there is also a meaning making, which is very much intertwined with their cultural and spiritual context, their belief systems and values. And from my clinical experience, I work with refugees and immigrants, and we often use something called culturogram, because just to be more culturally resonating with in assessing the background, also taking the client's history. And what we have often seen is that there's lots of meaning making around hope. For example, hope as in the cosmic order of cause and effect, which is popularly, maybe a more popular word to that is karmic theory. So I have to go through the suffering because there's something beneficial to come out of this in my afterlife or in my next birth. There's also meaning making around salvation and liberation through suffering. So suffering is seen as something that is positive, something that can lead to one's salvation and liberation from mortal life. There's also meaning making around enlightenment or deep suffering, which brings one to transpersonal realms of experience. In other traditions, there's benevolent reappraisal, for example, seeking a lesson. Why do I have to go through this suffering? There must be something that I can learn from this, and hence the hope of knowing something that is deeper. There's also a spiritual surrender during deep moments of suffering, in searching for comfort and reassurance through some higher power, love and care. And we know that from Christian tradition. There's also eschatological salvation, which is about eternal life or joy. And so what I'm trying to say is that with all this meaning making, which is so intertwined with the person's cultural and spiritual belief systems, it's not often so much as a doing hope, as in pathway and agency model. It's not often related to this life. There is transpersonal realms of hope and meaning making around that, which we can harness in therapy, but we often do not go into those levels to foster or facilitate meaning making in transpersonal realms. So we often talk about, okay, what makes you hopeful in this life, but what about afterlife? What about the person's meaning making around transpersonal realms of existence, and why not harness that in therapy too? And we also have sometimes people talk about seeking spiritual support in an active religious surrender. That is putting my life in God's hands and hope of finding something glorious in that. People also, in different cultural traditions, people also think suffering is about a deeper meaning. There is a spiritual connection in suffering, just as, for example, Christ's life. There, people often refer to Christ's suffering and the hope in eternal joy and life in that. So with that in the context, in like I mentioned, in the context of trauma, there's often a spiritual emergence or a person's access to something that's deeper, something that's we often talk about spiritual emergence. That's the best word to describe it. And that might hold the potential to some psychological integration of the traumatic experiences, because there's a deep meaning making around those experiences, and a person gets a sense of control, which is all about locus of control. And that's what is referred to in pathway and agency models also, because there's an internal locus of control and a meaning making around that, which the person wants in order to have a sense of the traumatic experience. And that often that can potentially take one to restoration of one's sense of purpose and meaning, or making a sense of what is this traumatic experience, and how do I make sense of this traumatic experience. So what I'm really trying to say through this paper is that we need to actively foster, facilitate, or validate the client's transpersonal meaning-making systems around hope and suffering, because there might be a great potential there to integrate trauma. Thank you.
Thank you. And I feel like spirituality is such a unifying thread between the first two papers. So perhaps we'll continue to see that in the last two papers. Once again, you're early. You still have about 2 minutes before the end of their supposed 10 minutes, right? So I'm wondering if you could maybe relate your research to the recent COVID-19 pandemic, right? Because hope is such a big thing that we could have in this world right now after so much loss and suffering. So I'm wondering if you've tried to relate your findings in your paper to like what's going on around us right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because there's collective suffering, but there's also collective hope somewhere, which is where people, we often hear that in our day-to-day interactions. There's always some sense of meaning making, where people say that, oh, this must be something for us to understand something deeper, or there is something more to what the world is experiencing. So they're not often just talking about 2 years or 3 years. They're often referring to something that's more deeper, or something that's more interconnected for all of us. And in that sense, something around collective hope. So I really think that there is a lot of potential for doing research on collective sense of hope. We have been doing a lot of research on collective suffering or collective trauma, but why not collective sense of hope here? Yeah.
Oh, indeed. All right. So let's move on to our third paper from Aleck, Kwong, Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. Do you have to share your screen too?
Yes.
All right. You should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you. So let's start. I resonate so much with the previous speakers because, especially for Shaima, hope is also part of my emphasis in my therapy work. So today I'm going to share with you my experience of conducting T-based online expressive art therapy during the pandemic. And the COVID-19 pandemic is an existential crisis for all humankind, right? As we suffer from anxiety and despair due to the alienation in various modes of existence. And these modes of existence can provide constructive potentials when we engage them directly or creatively. And this echoes with our Chinese wisdom and idiom that the other side of the crisis is opportunity. So I suggest, because I'm an expressive art therapist, I suggest using arts, especially if we are talking about expressive art therapy as a holistic psychotherapy approach, which can facilitate one's biopsychosocial spiritual well-being through arts. We aim to help people re-engage with the four modes of existence. I believe tea is a very appropriate art material, and I will show you why. And for the first mode of existence, which is unwelt, the natural world, it's very important for us to reconnect with nature, especially during the lockdowns. Especially for people in Hong Kong, we are in a very small city, and travel restrictions make us being trapped in this small city. And a lot of people in the beginning of the pandemic started to go hiking and go connect with nature. So from an eco-psychological perspective, the well-being of nature and humans are at one. And a lot of people in the Chinese culture need to rely on the sky or nature to become complete and harmonious. So tea comes from the nature, and its color, all the taste and the texture are expected to be sensationally connect us to nature. And the green color of the powder usually associate with tree leaves and also grassland. And people also easily associate the brown color of hojicha or the coffee powder with soil or timber. So it's better than watercolor in terms of its multisensory nature. We can also taste it and also smell it instead of just using watercolor as an art material. Okay, for midwell, social distancing has reduced our chances of interacting with other people, including our friends and family during the pandemic. And according to the polyvagal theory, people, when being threatened with to safety, would like to engage in the social system to reach out for others. And tea has been served in a lot of occasions, like the English afternoon tea or Japanese tea ceremony. And taking the Japanese tea ceremony as an example, the host emphasized the respect to the guest, and it's related to the concept of ichigo, ichie, meaning the host is serving his whole heart to the guest. And I think that is also similar in our therapy work. The therapist has to be congruent with and fully present, and the unconditionally positive regard would promote the holding environment for the clients. Okay, the third one would be the Argenweld. And according to Rollo May, that is the primary interest of psychotherapy. And a lot of people need the autonomy, authenticity, and ownership during the COVID-19, because they are being restricted from those social distancing restrictions. And the T, with its fluidity, provided the freedom to express and explore. And however, there would be a potential of triggering a strong affective response because they cannot control the fluid, the T during drawing. But we can limit it. We can limit it by a smaller drawing paper and the use of a Chinese ink brush, which could increase the reflective distance. Okay, last but not least, the Uber world is the spiritual dimension. And according to a recent study conducted in the middle of the pandemic, actually a lot of Chinese people have shifted their life meanings towards autonomy and minimalistic living. And autonomy is similar to what I've discussed in Well, but for minimalistic living, it's related to the concept, the Taoist concept in the Chinese culture called Wei, meaning doing nothing, but rather we let go of our acts and following the path of what is happening. It is also associated with the Buddhist philosophy of impermanence and the Zen Buddhist concept of wabi-sabi. So I also used Ichigo, the concept of the Japanese tea ceremony as the title of my workshop. And these concepts are very important for normalizing adversity as part of life for Chinese people. And expressive art therapy also emphasizes such a concept in a way that clients are asked to let go of their knowledge and control and create what they want to create according to what is emerged during the process. Okay, the philosophy of minimalism, which also promotes the appreciation of imperfection and impermanence in our life. So it is also for tea is also a medium from nature that help people bestow meaning and help them guide through the changes, especially because of its fluidity. So on top of meaning making, giving hope is also very important. So I asked the participants of my workshop to create a Chinese character which carries their hope for the future. So this is basically the structure of the workshop. So they first sensitize through the using their tactile experience and also all the senses to connect with the tea. And this is also a mindfulness experience. And then they start to draw using tea and the Chinese ink brush. Then they will create a pictorial Chinese character. And I also asked them to create a pronunciation so they have a more multi-sensory experience. And then they will do the reflection and sharing. Finally, there will be a closing ritual using body gesture for a mutual support through a non-verbal experience. So this is one of the case. Lady who has a difficulty in mobility didn't want to join this program at first because she had to ask her family member to prepare the materials for her. But then her motivation overcame this resistance. And you can see in the first picture, as initially she felt the tea powder is something really thick. So she related to her immobility in her her lower limbs. But then she started to find more possibilities through adding water to the tea. And you can see in the upper part of the drawing, it becomes more like freer. And also there is some emptiness. And also she opened up possibilities. And in the second picture is the character that she created. And it means unity and also sovereignty in Chinese. And you can see there is an elongated roots, and also she associated with her inner strength. She hoped that her legs and her strength will be recovered in the next year. Okay, so this is the summary.
Just to interrupt you for a moment, 1 minute. So you have to wrap it up.
Sure. So you can see there's the summary why we aim to re-engage the four modes of existence, and also why tea would be a good material to help achieve these goals. And these are the references and my contact. Thank you.
Wow, okay, great. Well, that's perfect timing then, actually. So I feel like your presentation really shows how important it is to consider therapy in different cultural contexts, right? Because my parents are actually from Hong Kong, so I know how terrible things were during COVID. You know, being quarantined in such a small area must be really difficult. So having therapy that connects people with others is really, really important. All right, so we're moving on to our last paper session by Christine Wykes Driver. She's going to be presenting a paper titled A Gentle Underlying Flow to Life, Spirituality and Women's Stories of Recovery and Overeaters Anonymous. Whenever you're ready, you could start. Oh, I don't think, okay, there we go, yeah. All right, we can see your screen now. Hi, you'll have to unmute. Yep, Christine, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yep.
There we go. Yes, we can hear you now.
Here right. I am.
Yep, no worries.
Let's get that out of the way. Right, and let's. Okay. So, yes, spirituality in women's stories of recovery in Overeaters Anonymous. So, just some key terms. Overeaters Anonymous is a mutual aid fellowship which is based on the same principles as Alcoholics Anonymous. For shorthand, it talks about compulsive overeating, but actually that also includes undereating, binging, purging, overexercising. The main program is about working the 12 steps, which involves admitting powerlessness over the compulsive behavior and seeking help from a self-defined higher power. Recovery is ongoing. Members continue to work the program and support newcomers. So this was an IPA study, a qualitative study based on interviews with women in Overeaters Anonymous who were in stable recovery. It was interpretative phenomenological analysis, which pays close attention to the individual perspective of each interviewee. And it was research as part of my master's at UEL. So the participants were 5 women who were recruited by Snowball Recruitment early in 2020 from OA groups in England. The selection criteria were that they were in stable recovery for at least 1 year, have worked the 12 steps, regularly attend OA meetings, are working with a sponsor, and have had no recent traumatic life events. I did approximately 1 hour interviews with each of them, either face-to-face, on Zoom, or by phone. So the rationale for the study really is that there are few qualitative studies of women's experience of spirituality in 12-step programs other than AA. There's evidence for the role of spirituality in recovery, but that's mostly based on American quantitative studies, again, of AA or Narcotics Anonymous. IPA allows for very rich exploration of each individual's lived experience. The theoretical part of the analysis was drawn from positive psychology. A positive psychology perspective is very congruent with a focus on recovery rather than addiction and the growth that comes from living through challenging experiences. So there were 3 major themes. I'll give you a little taste of them. So the first theme was really about moving from despair to hope. So all the individuals had various histories of struggling with disordered eating. For example, one of them spent 12 years on meal replacement diets, losing weight, regaining, losing, regaining. They had problems with life in general, not just their eating behaviors. I just didn't know how to cope with feelings or with the difficulties I was going through. They found a sense of belonging in OA meetings. So previously, I thought I was unique, but then I learned people were like me. I could see a light at the end of the tunnel. The other theme really was around how they developed a relationship with a higher power. So initially they had to let go of their old ideas of God or a higher power. As one said, my concept of a higher power was really still a punitive God. In the early days, their focus was, I need a higher power to help me get control of my eating. Someone said, my higher power is infinite, so it can help me with small things like portion sizes and amounts. But as their recovery progressed in later years, this expanded to more areas of their life. I aim to be more present with my higher power. It doesn't have to be a problem. They didn't really want to define their higher power or found it difficult to do so, but they all used words about something bigger than me. And they described a sort of supportive undercurrent to life, a gentle underlying flow to life if I don't kick against it too much. They felt guided by their higher power. I think my higher power has really led me to go through all these paths, and a sense of some kind of underlying order, the intricate way things fit together when you stop fighting them. And there were elements of awe. If I stand on a mountaintop and I look around me, I know that a human being could not put any of that there. And then there was a theme, the third theme was around transformation. There was a lot of personal growth, and people talked about growing up. I'm an adult and I have to take responsibility for myself. Their priorities changed. Today, I know that money, having more and more, is not going to fix me. And their life became much fuller. My life has got a huge amount, much, much bigger since I came into fellowship. They've changed in their attitudes. They're less self-absorbed and they happily pass on and work with others through sponsorship. It's me being able to live the gratitude that I feel for every single person that sponsored me in my time in the fellowship. And they described dramatic changes in their lives as a result of working the program. It's helped me relieve the obsession with food and my weight and my body and everything, but it's given me a completely new way of life. I have peace and serenity inside me. So these findings support Dossett's work, which explored how people describe the higher power. And there are very, very many ways that people find to describe what a higher power might be for them. It also aligns with other qualitative research where spirituality is viewed as key to recovery. And the depth of the IPA gives insight into the lived experience of developing a relationship with a higher power and the intimacy of that relationship in everyday life. These accounts really show that recovery is about self-transcendence, and there includes the 4 characteristics identified by Kwong, moving from a concern with self to a focus on others, more intrinsic motivation, a desire to avoid harm to others, and uplifting emotions. And you can see how in the accounts, how participants have moved through their suffering to find peace and a richer experience of life. They're more altruistic, their relationships have improved, they feel themselves part of the wider OA community, and they experience self-transcendent emotions through prayer, mindfulness, being in nature, community, and in relationship with their higher power. There are also many ways that recovery seems to link to concepts from positive psychology. 12-step fellowships are positive institutions that promote flourishing. And in the same way that well-being is more than the absence of mental ill health, recovery is more than stopping the addictive behavior. It entails personal growth and a new way of relating to others and life. Spirituality is central to 12-step recovery, but that is open to interpretation. It's focused on personal experience and practical actions that cultivate positive emotions, character strengths, and virtues. My key sort of points, takeaways would be, let's understand that recovery is so much more than giving up the substance or compulsive behavior. Let's learn from people in long-term recovery about how they live a good life. Let's talk about spirituality in counselling or other helping relationships. And let's not be scared of the spiritual basis of 12-step programs. And obviously, limitations, it's IPA, it's very individualistic. It's not about development of theory. Lots of possibilities for future research, sort of looking more deeply at, the changes over time, length of recovery, and other intersections between gender, ethnicity, age, disabilities, and so on. So thank you for your attention, and do get in touch if you would like to discuss or give me any feedback. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Actually, everyone else has already dropped off their emails. I mean, the other presenters have dropped off their emails in the chat, so
okay.
You could add yours as well, if you like, so everyone can contact you. Yeah, great. So I'm so glad that you brought this idea of self-transcendence, because we're having a summit later on today featuring Paul and a few other keynote speakers like Scott Barry Kaufman and David Yadin, who's going to be talking about this idea. It's really powerful. But back to your presentation, like one thing that really moved me was just how, putting down the quotes of the participants, right? It's like to hear it directly from them. That's really powerful. And sorry, it's my phone. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. It was really powerful to hear them in first person, especially through their transformation. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
All right. So now we turn it over to the participants or the attendees, see if they have any questions. So if you have any questions, just drop in the chat. All right, in the meantime, I mean, sometimes, participants are a little shy. So if you do have questions, you can also reach out to the presenters over networking. I think in our remaining time, maybe we can go around and maybe just some final words from everyone, based on your presentation, based on what you heard from other people today, maybe a synthesis. I really don't know. It's up to you. So let's start with Ev and see if you have anything, last words to say for this session.
I just wanted to thank you all. I think it's really nice when you're in a kind of collective space where you're all like-minded. There's obviously so many, similarities between all of our presentations. So it's nice to see that, especially because I think we're all in different parts of the world. I'm in New York, and I think it's very almost validating, right? That people really find what you find as important. So thank you for all of your really hard work and your great presentations.
Great. All right. So Shaima?
Well, I think I don't have anything new to share, but I really feel that, until psychology, the field of psychology, until we get to the core of our human experience, we might be just searching for something in the dark. And that is about consciousness, and spiritual experiences is the doorway to that. So until we open ourselves to that experience, because I think psychology has always been about wakeful experiences, what happens when we are in our waking mode, but what when we are not awake? What about when we sleep? What's the experience when we sleep? That's still our experience. So until we open ourselves to consciousness and spirituality and transpersonal realms of our being and experience. And I want to share something personal, that every time I talk to my friends or talk to a set of people, there's always something transpersonal that it's such a common experience. Why will we not bring that into the realm of psychology if it's such a common experience? Well, only one person has to start off something about transpersonal, and there's endless experiences that people will share about their transpersonal emotions and transpersonal experiences. And So why will we not bring that into the realm of psychology? And this group with the different presentations has just validated that, right? Because we are all thinking about spiritual realms of existence and the need to study that and bring that into healing and PIP. So I really want to thank all the other presenters and Tim, you as well, for kind of bringing an integration and synthesis for all of this. So thank you so much.
Great, yeah, and so many big questions for us to all think about. All right, Aleck.
Okay, I love this discussion so much because, like what the previous speakers have mentioned, this is we all have some similarity in our presentations, but yet we use kind of different approaches or we have different foci. So I think this is really inspiring, and we can try to integrate different approaches or like the theories and into our work. And I think that this discussion really helped me. And this also reminded me that we are like interconnected, but we are also separable because we are unique in our therapy work. So really thank you for bringing up so many different theories and your own approaches. And I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for your unique perspective. I feel like you said, I mean, when we are doing this as a group, everyone could, chip in their perspective, and we get a more holistic picture of maybe phenomena or what we're looking at. All right, and finally, Christine.
Well, yes, I mean, even just in this short time, there's so many little parallels around hope and spirituality and connection as well, and community, and the freedom to kind of connect with your soul, or I feel, yes, I feel like there's a bit of a revolution happening in that we've been so scared of being religious fundamentalists that we've forgotten how to talk comfortably about spirituality and those kind of things, which people will do in natural settings, but in more public settings, there's still a fear and about it. And it's very encouraging to me to hear other people speaking the same language, but applying it to so many wonderful areas of research. And thank you again, Tim, for your fabulous organization. Brilliant.
Yeah, no worries. I'm so glad that you all were able to join us today. Well, I think that's we can end this session early, and so participants can move on to set up for the next keynote, which is actually from Scott Churchill, whether it is possible to merge existential and positive psychology. Very interesting. So that's going to be next, so please stay with us. And for everyone who's watching right now, the recordings are going to be available 1 month after the conference, so you could rewatch it, maybe take out notes. For those who are watching the recording already, hello, later on. All right, so thanks everyone, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. All right, take care. Yep, no worries.
Sing me a sad song over and over. I'll be alright by and by. Let me be consumed in a love divine, to find where the treasure lies. I want to hear that small voice whisper to my forgotten soul. They say it's never too late to start again. What breaks your heart will make you